We are and always will be a nation of immigrants.
This is my country, my damn country. Give me my country, you can keep the rest.
Bold men and women yearning for freedom and opportunity who leave their homelands and come to a new country to start their lives over.
We were strangers once too.
My country, my damn country. Give me my country, you can keep.
Hello, aliens and allies. Your friendly Russian is here. We're back. This is We the Aliens podcast. I'm your host, Sasha Kapustina. It's been a little bit. It's so great to be back with you. Thank you for tuning in. Quick housekeeping. We have a new format. Starting this week, there will be 2 half-hour episodes every week. 1 guest, 2 episodes. On Mondays, we will talk about my guest's immigration experience. And on Thursdays, we'll talk about what they brought here, their area of expertise. Science, politics, arts, business, whatever they're amazing at. I hope you guys like this new format, and we'll see how that goes in the next few months. In other news, I have resurrected my Ask Your Friendly Russian thingy, and it currently lives on TikTok. I know you think it's all dancing teenagers, but really, it's not. You can find me at Kapuster Official. I'll put a link in the show notes. Come help me fight communist and right-wing trolls. It's fun. Okay, I'm not sure if I mentioned it here, but we are loading all of the episodes onto YouTube now. So you can find We the Aliens podcast channel on YouTube and listen there and share with your friends who don't do podcasts properly. You can find a link in the show notes and on our website. And finally, we have a brand new spring merch design in our store. I personally love it, and I hope you like it too. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Okay, done with housekeeping. I have an amazing guest this week. Ariel Cohen is a political analyst and strategist, writer, and commentator. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center. He's also a senior fellow at the International Tax and Investment Center. Dr. Cohen consults for Fortune 500 companies and international law firms. You've seen him on TV, you've heard him on the radio, you've read his columns in Forbes and other publications. He is a leading expert on Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and the author of the book Russian Imperialism, Development and Crisis that you can find on Amazon. And today we talk about the part of his journey that he doesn't talk often about. We talk about how he and his family escaped Soviet Union. Ariel's family were refuseniks. What is a refusenik? Here's a little bit of context. In the Soviet Union, most basic human rights were limited. There was no freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, there was no elections, no private property. Take any human right that you deem essential and basic, and it was restricted. Specifically, freedom of travel was limited. For example, in order to go out of the country, you needed to get an exit visa. Most of the time, you could only travel to Eastern Bloc countries, those with friendly regimes. Yugoslavia, Poland, maybe if you're lucky, East Germany. Travel to the West was even more restricted. Say you're a scientist going to a conference or an actor going to a film festival. If you've been a good communist, you will probably be allowed to attend, but you will be accompanied by a KGB officer at all times who would be making sure that you remain a good communist and don't succumb to the vices of the capitalist society. Now, if you happen to be born Jewish, things were even worse because Soviet Union had the system of state anti-Semitism. Jews were systematically restricted from attending universities, getting good jobs. Propaganda called anyone who practiced Judaism an enemy of the people. USSR broke diplomatic relations with Israel in the 60s, and anyone who wanted to move to Israel was deemed a traitor. Pretty much anyone who wanted to leave Soviet Union was seen as a traitor. So Soviet Union actively prevented people from leaving. And this is how this word came about, refusnik, which is the English version of Russian отказник, from the word отказ, refusal to allow to leave. Refuseniks were people, predominantly Jewish, who were simply not allowed to go. But the Soviet economy wasn't doing so great in the 70s and 80s, and that gave the West and human rights activists in the West some leverage. And so over the course of the many years, under international pressure, USSR would slowly allow people out. This was a little bit of general context, and here's Ariel's story of getting out of Soviet Union and coming to the US. When did you come to the US and where did you come here from?
I came to the US in the summer of 1987. I was 28 at the time, and I was very happy because I was accepted to the graduate school at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. And at the time, it was Tufts and Harvard. So I came here to study to get my graduate degree, and then one thing led to another. I stayed for they invited me to stay for the PhD, and then I got a pretty good job in Washington, D.C., and the rest is history, as they say.
Right.
But we should start the journey in 1973 in Saratov. As an 8-year-old, my parents brought me into this snowed, frozen, big industrial city. I've never been to Toledo, Ohio, but I always said it's like Toledo, Ohio, but in Russia, Rust Belt and military industrial complex, and I never liked it. I wasn't born there, and I never felt a part of Saratov. I was born in the Crimea, in Yalta, currently occupied.
But why did you have to move?
My dad was a geologist. He's still alive. He's 91, and he couldn't get a job in Ukraine. He worked in Ukraine. He wanted a different job, and the only two places that offered him a job. One was Tyumen, which is a big oil and gas province, basin, probably one of the largest in the world. And the other one, Saratov. But Tyumen, which I visited maybe 10, 12 years ago, still, I'm not making it up, has bears coming to the suburbs of the city. It's in the woods. Yeah, it's in Siberia.
Yeah, it's super cold.
This was too much for him. So he chose Saratov, which, had a theater and a philharmonic and things like that, civilization. But I detested it. The situation at home was absolutely nasty. It was very interesting because I went through the thing that when we first got there in 68, people did not know who Jews are, what Jews are. They said, Yevrei, et kak, a Jew, what is it? And then very quickly, because of the Soviet propaganda, they discovered that Jews are bad people and you get encountered with pretty nasty, virulent, physical anti-Semitism. And really? I cannot count how many times I had to end up in fistifights and worse. Because people called me a Yid, people called me a kike, people tried to hit me, et cetera, et cetera. But that started in the kindergarten in Yalta, in the Crimea. That was part of Ukraine. Anti-Semitism there was extremely indigenous and well-rooted. And this is one of the formative experiences you get growing up in a place like that. That was my Jewish privilege. There was certain school that didn't take the Jews, period. I was always interested in things like foreign affairs and national security. No freaking way. I mean, I was all set to go into biology and, I dreamed to be like Konrad Lorenz, the animal psychologist and whatnot, because I knew the stuff I was really interested in. There's no freaking way I could get into.
Wow. And so how did you end up in Israel? Just for our audience, at the time, it was essentially impossible to leave Soviet Union.
Yes and no.
Okay.
For people who did not have any kind of interesting diplomas or education, they could leave. If you were a butcher or if you were even a nurse, they would let you go. And it also depended where. And one of the big strategic mistakes, because what I became is sort of a foreign policy, international affairs guy, and you quickly train yourself to think about strategies. This was totally anti-strategic, what my dad did, because we lived in what was called the closed city. And the closed city is a city that the idea of a classified state secret regime applied not just to individuals like my father, but to the whole freaking city. And they would not let foreigners, for example, to visit. When a need arose later on for us to get in contact with foreigners to get help to get out of Russia, we had to travel to Moscow. Well, I talked to people in Yalta, in my birthplace. But my father applied to exit with his family, to leave, to emigrate to Israel. And he had an active security clearance. Now, for those of our viewers who don't know that, if you're an American scientist and you have some kind of a security clearance, my father didn't have a top clearance, he was a geologist. You can travel wherever you want in the world. In the most of the Western countries, as far as I know, unless you're working for the military, unless you're working for intelligence, there's no limitation on your freedom of travel. In the Soviet Union at the time, there was, and even somebody, PhD, geology, oil and gas. As a kid at that time, I said, Dad, what secrets do you know? You're all about, drilling for gas and oil. And he said, well, maybe I know the coordinates of those drilling rigs. And I said, Dad, they're like 30-yard high. They're huge. Can Americans see them from space with the satellites? I said, of course they can. So the classified access to information was garbage. And then they said, oh, and your mom, my mom, now deceased, has a security clearance too, because she works in a medical lab in a industrial plant that works for the military industrial complex, which was probably more than half of the factories in Saratov. So she was there and she said, wow, this is amazing. I spend my days looking into a microscope at people's blood samples and urine samples and, feces samples. And they still would classify that.
Wow.
Just to set up the frame, explain why did we want to leave? First and foremost was because my father's father, my grandfather, David Kogan, was executed by Stalin. He was a communist. He was an editor of a newspaper. That was his last job. And before that, he was sort of mid-range apparatchik. He was mid-range party functionary and probably a true believer. In 1938, he was arrested, and soon after, in the fall of 38, was executed. I have a file, NKVD, a secret police file, including 5 confessions written one after another with deteriorating handwriting. Of course, my father didn't know about the confessions. I got the confessions not too long ago from the KGB of Kazakhstan, from the secret police of Kazakhstan.
What did they accuse him of?
Treason, like everybody.
Classic, yeah.
Again, for those who are not following Russian Soviet history, about 700,000 people were executed by Stalin in 37, 38 alone. So my grandfather got caught in that meat grinder. So my father grew up with this tremendous trauma of losing his father at the age of 9, of hating the regime, and becoming a Zionist, sort of through his own self-educating process. Where he wanted to go was Israel, and that's where we ended up.
I do want to go back a little bit. And so how did you manage to get out of Soviet Union?
Okay, so my father was turned down. I think personally, in retrospect, it's always 2020 vision is the best, that he should have quit his job that had the
Clearance.
Security clearance and moved us to another town from which people were leaving already on a regular basis. But knowing my father, knowing who he is, he went, as they say, with the head against the wall. He banged his head against the wall. He decided, screw it, I'm going to do it, by hook or by crook. And it was by crook because they wouldn't let him. And then he had to quit his job. The whole family went through a number of denunciation meetings where people literally would stand up and scream at you, in that case, my parents and me at school, traitor, traitor, you're betraying the motherland, you're betraying the Soviet Union. You look surprised. You never heard about that?
No.
Really?
I've never heard about that kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness. But a lot of people went through that. What was interesting for me is my schoolmates, I was in 9th grade and then 10th grade. That's the very last 2 years. They turned against me. Not only they turned against me, they were organized by the party secretary of the school. This is a pretty good school. This is a science school. And these kids, some of them from pretty good families, meaning high-level officials or scientists, they turned against me. They had to stand up. They were expected to stand up and say, Kogan, which is the Russian version of my name, is a traitor. He wants to leave the Soviet Union. He wants to, be in the capitalist West. We hate him. And then when they dragged me in front of the whole school, hundreds of people, the school assembly, right? So it's 300 people. They said, renounce your parents in front of us now. And
Oh my God.
yeah, I'm 15. This is not a fully formed personality. I said, I'm not an informer against my parents. I'm not going to do any such thing. And that was it. I mean, yeah. So when the pressure didn't work, the same people who were organizing it, there was a guy who was in charge of the military training. Every school in the Soviet Union then and now, by the way, Putin brought it back, has like ROTC. So the guy who was in charge of military training, a colonel, and the deputy director of the school, the director of the school principal, organized guys to beat me up. The first time, a guy who was like about a head taller than me tried to attack me in the school bathroom. I wasn't trained in martial arts, but my dad taught me a couple of things and whatnot. So I managed to raise my thumbs into his mouth, and that took care of that. Then a couple of guys tried to, do something. I hit one of them and ran away. Then 4 guys decided that they're going to do it outside of the school. And I said, okay, but it has to be fair. It has to be fair. So it's 1-on-1. I'll fight all of you, but 1-on-1, not. So the kids, right? The 15-year-olds. So, okay. So the first one, who is now my Facebook friend and lives in Israel, Misha Kamenetsky, again, with no martial training, I managed to pivot and hit him with the heel of my shoe. They had platform shoes. I don't know if you are old enough to know what platform shoes are. So I had this big ass heel, and I hit him straight in the face. I came home, my whole shirt was covered in blood, and my mom almost fainted. I said, "Don't worry, Mom, it's not my blood." So they kept escalating. This is where you learn about what escalation domination is. They had the escalation ladder domination. You learn it in strategic studies. So they got 7 guys who were 2 years older, a year older than me. And at that age difference is
huge,
very meaningful.
Yeah.
So the 7 guys dragged me out of school and just kicked the shit out of me. All I needed to do was to stand there with my arms covering my private parts that they were trying to kick. And a friend of mine sort of managed to drag me away, and that was the end. So I got pretty depressed. Before we went to Israel, I probably had something of a depression setting up, and my academic performance dropped tremendously. I couldn't concentrate. And
I can imagine.
Yeah, I thought we won't get out. I had 2 functions in that family. So my father had to quit that job with security clearance. He became a welder in a construction site. So, a Jewish guy, 40-something, learning to weld. He got asthma. He started drinking. It wasn't fun. Yeah, he's still alive, so he didn't drink himself to death.
Yeah.
He got diabetes. I mean, this was not good. So I had 2 functions. One, I had to support the family. So I created a little distribution network for mohair wool, because mohair wool was not available. A lot of consumer goods were not available. So mohair wool was not available. So I found 3 women who would sell it in little kiosks. And we got a little bit of support. We were getting $100 to $120 for 3 months. So about $40 a month from American Jews. And with that money, I would go to Moscow. I would purchase the mohair wool, distribute it. It was more money from that operation than my parents, a PhD and a medical doctor, were making combined. So that was like 400 rubles a month.
Which is livable.
Which was quite livable. It was better than what we had before.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And the second thing was, because of my English was better than my parents, I had to do a lot of communication. So I communicated with a guy who was a member of the British Parliament. And then I met a woman who was a pensioner already at the time, wonderful Dutch Christian woman, Gertrude van Nederveen. I met her at a bench in Yalta. I said, hi. She said, who are you? What are you doing? I said, well, I'm basically practicing my English, but we're trying to leave the Soviet Union. We're Jewish, blah, blah, blah. We're trying to go to Israel. And she, as a Christian, was amazed by that, because the prophecy of ingathering of the Jews.
Yes.
And this woman, who was an elementary school teacher with no particular wealth, lived with her husband in probably a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment in The Hague, would come and visit us like 3 times and bring us stuff, go to London, liaise with people in the British Parliament and with others, and smuggle letters for us, and was an amazing, amazing person. So
What
wherever
did
she is,
British
I hope she's in paradise. What's that?
Yeah. What did British Parliament have to do with the whole
The
thing?
British Parliament had a number of ventures, including intervening with the visiting Soviet dignitaries. Boris Ponomaryov, who was a secretary of the Central Committee, once came, and they would give, and others would give them the list of the refuseniks. So that was a standard operating procedure. A Soviet Puba, senior Soviet official comes, they talk about whatever they talk about, grain purchases. The Soviet Union could not feed itself, and they were buying, among other things, grain in the United States, Argentina, Canada, etc. And they would get a list of the Soviet refuseniks, the Jews who were trying to leave. And our job, my job, my parents' job was to get us on that list. So you would travel to Moscow, meet with refuseniks, and have those relationships so that they would put you on a list. So as the teenager, as a kid, you type it on a mechanical typewriter, our story, and then pass on messages for my father's colleagues, the geologists, who would bring it up in scientific conferences, say, well, there's a scientist, you don't let him out. So it's a public shame and blame campaign on behalf of these refuseniks, and that's how they let us out. They let us out, I think, before some kind of an Olympics, 76, that was, I think, an Olympics, that they didn't want noise about it. There was a Communist Party Congress, and they would let these people out bit by bit. And I was very lucky because I was already in the last school before graduation of high school. And if we wouldn't get out soon, they would draft me, because with that kind of background, they would not take me to any college in the Soviet Union. And if they drafted me, I may have ended up in Afghanistan. And you know what happened to people in Afghanistan? They got killed. So lucky me, popped out of there with my family, finished high school in Israel, and then served in the Israeli army, and finished the law school in Israel, got accepted to the Israeli bar, and then decided to leave it all and go to US to do what I really like to do and study what I like to study. So it sort of worked out.
Wow, what a story. I'm so grateful that you shared it. I mean, I heard about refuseniks, not being able to leave, and I heard, of course, about anti-Semitism, and I was very fortunate never to really experience it in Russia. But yeah, I had no idea about those public shaming campaigns and
Oh,
how
that was very typical. We knew actually a girl, we basically took her in, Mara Weissmull. Mara's story was that they worked on Mara. Mara's parents, her father was in the camps, wanted to leave, was very traumatized in the camps, and had a huge stutter and whatnot. And the girl was about 15-year-old when they got their permission to leave, and there was a lot of pressure on Mara to stay. And the poor thing stayed, and they put her, as a showpiece to talk in meetings, in schools and whatnot. I denounced my parents. They went to a Zionist, place, and I love the Soviet power. I stay here. She was given a studio apartment, and I think they promised her to get her into college. And about a year later, she shows up at our doorstep and said, "I miss my mom. Can you help me?"
Oh my God.
And we took her in, and she said, "Okay, what do I need to do? I have to go to my parents. I want my parents. I want my brother." Her brother, Samuel, was a buddy of mine. Anyway, they let her out in the end.
Oh my God.
She
Thank
is
God.
in Israel. She's happily married, kids, what have you. Yeah, so that was a big thing with the Weissmull family, and just an example of how they put pressure on teenagers to stay in the Soviet Union, denounce their parents. There were articles in the newspapers about the big hero, Mara Weissmull, who gave up her family, renounced her parents because they were going to Israel. Didn't work.
Such a brutal, such a I don't even know how to call it, like extremely immoral thing to destroy families like that.
Yeah, but if you think about what else is going on in the world, this is this is how archetypical totalitarian regime works. The Uyghurs in China, when people intervene, when the governments intervene with what people think, how they believe, what do they say, can they travel or not, limitations on travel. In China, for example, if your social score, they have a social score
Yeah.
of, yeah, if you were nasty to an official, if you were late to work, if you posted something against the Communist Party on the internet, your score goes down. At some point, you cannot travel. They won't sell you a train or bus or airplane ticket. That is limitation of your freedom of travel. Same thing with work. If you're not a reliable cadre, you will not get certain jobs. This is how a totalitarian state today, North Korea, China, Cuba, Venezuela, etc. And unfortunately, the dynamic in Russia is getting back after a hiatus since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We just marked the 90th birthday of Boris Yeltsin, of the first president of post-communist Russia. And a lot of people hate him. A lot of things became very difficult in Russia. The transition post-communist, the post-communist transition in Russia was very hard economically to a lot of people.
The go-to slogan of the current propaganda is, well, do you want to go back to the 90s? Do you want
right, or
the
the проклятые 90s,
yeah.
the accursed 1990s? Why it's accursed? Why is it accursed when you became capable of, you were allowed to, by the state, to go to Turkey on vacation, to go to Paris to see Paris, to study abroad, to worship in a church of your choice? But this is increasing, so now people can go to jail for posting a joke, literally. I mean, these days, Sergei Smirnov, the journalist, is taken into administrative custody for 25 days for reposting his own joke on the internet that contained information about the Navalny meeting. So Russia is going back into that direction, and this is very dangerous. An ideology that starts to use state tools to dictate how people think, punish them for wrong think. And yeah, we see a lot of garbage on the internet. We see a lot of conspiracy theories. We see a lot of really crazy, nasty, weird, the anti-vaxxers, the racists, what is it, fight the steal, whatever, the myth about the Trump victory being stolen.
Oh, yeah,
all that is untrue, right?
Yeah.
But once you start blocking people's freedom to express their opinions, in my book, in my life experience, in my grandfather's life experience, getting a bullet in the back of your head, this is a slippery slope. This is very, very dangerous.
I do want to ask you, when you came to Israel, how did you feel?
I felt wonderful because first of all, the way my parents raised me, I wanted out. I wanted out of the Soviet Union. I wanted to go to Israel. I didn't have any problems with going to Israel. It was a big deal. But mostly, or most of all, I didn't want to stay in the Soviet Union. I understood that this system of incessant pressure in school, at work, the compulsory membership in the Communist Youth Organization, the compulsory membership in the party if you want to have a career, the state that is controlling everything, it's controlling your livelihood. You cannot travel abroad. You cannot read what you want. By the age of 15, 16, I was reading the samizdat, the self-published underground literature. I was listening to the Voice of America and the BBC, Radio Liberty. So in terms of my education, I was well on track to become an anti-communist and to understand what the Soviet regime was. I was very happy to be in Israel. I was happy to study Hebrew. It was a much better experience.
When did America become the dream?
The education was a dream. I worked for Radio Liberty, Radio for Europe, audience research. So I worked since I got out for a big American operation. And then I became a journalist. So I had contacts with U.S. Agency for Information, U.S. Information Agency, USIA, that was later collapsed into the State Department. So I understood that the quality of education I can get in the United States is much higher. And also, there are certain things you could study in Israel, no problem. Medicine, engineering. I tried to study biology. I understood it. I had some serious issues with things like physical chemistry and calculus. That was not my thing. In any
I
event,
can relate.
yeah, I pretty much had a visit in 1984 at Columbia University, and the professor I talked to, the associate dean, turned out to be a Trotskyite, and he told me, "Oh, you come from the Soviet Union, you cannot study the Soviet Union." So me, with my Russian native and my huge amount of reading that I've done by then, I could not study the Soviet Union. Why? Because you're biased, he said. And you will not be allowed to go there to do research in the archives. Well, guess what? So this was 84. By 1992, I was in Moscow in presidential archives doing some very interesting research for my PhD, going over the protocols of the Politburo and the Central Committee that documented how the Soviet Union was collapsing under Gorbachev. In fact, it was highly classified. It was declassified for the court proceedings against the Communist Party. It could be reclassified again. I don't know.
Yeah, it probably
But
is.
so much for that professor's pushback on me not becoming an academically trained American, Soviet, and Russian affairs specialist. I did defend my PhD in 93, writing about the collapse of the Soviet Union, including these fascinating materials from the presidential archives.
So when you came to the US, the plan was to get the degree, and did you plan on staying, or did you want to go back to Israel? What was the hope?
Well, the plan was to finish the degree and possibly go back to Israel, sort of get back into the law, which I didn't like, and maybe have some political career or something like that, or diplomatic career. But I got an offer to pursue my PhD from the Fletcher School, free ride. They, waived all the fees. And then while I was working on my PhD, I taught college, but one of the big think tanks reached out to me. Well, they reached out to my mentor at the Fletcher School, Professor Dick Schultz, and he recommended me, for which I'm eternally grateful for him. And I was running a project in, I think, like 6 republics. The Soviet Union just collapsed. This was my last big research project for the radios.
What was the most challenging thing for you about coming to America, and how did you overcome it?
Gaining weight. I didn't overcome it. And I think
Physical weight?
Yeah, physical weight. I think I gained like over 40 pounds.
Oh my
To
God.
get to the land of the limitless double cheeseburger, and it'll do it. Took a while to drop that weight, and it's still a struggle. I'm being facetious. I mean, that's probably not the main problem. Another problem, I think, a more existential problem, is that to me, coming after being a refusenik, after being an anti-communist, living through the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was a goal that I worked with an organization that was dedicated to it. That was Radio Liberty. I was on the research side. And I wrote a book about the collapse. I saw the collapse of the Soviet Union as a positive development, both for the people of the peoples, plural, of the Soviet Union, because I was exposed to a lot of narratives of the Baltic nationalists, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Central Asians, etc. To me, it was a positive thing. To me, as I said in the book, the challenge for Russia is whether it becomes a democratic nation state or rebuilds the empire. And I would add to that now, does it stay democratic, warts and all difficulties of being democratic under Yeltsin, or it reverts to its authoritarian roots? Both me and a bunch of my colleagues that have the background in Russian history agree that what Russia became is more like a Tsarist empire, not a communist, ultra totalitarian state. It's less of a North Korea, more Russia under Alexander III or Nicholas II, where there's a lot of oppression, but still people could leave. People were engaged in certain amount of opposition activity. Now you see it comes with a higher and higher cost if you engage in opposition activity. And I think it's unfortunate from the point of view of a Russian elite, of people who value things like freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of political engagement, that Russia did not manage to continue this westward vector, the direction we thought it was
Right.
going.
And so how is that connected to
Oh
your
yeah,
personal?
So I didn't overcome it. So just like gaining weight, this challenge became unsurmountable, and that is that I came to America seeing it as a shining city on the hill, as a place that has no deficits or no dark side.
And I think a lot of immigrants come that way.
Yes, and to me, the era of demise of communism, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, was sort of the epitome of the hopes that I had. And then I come to America, I study here, and I'm totally inured. I'm not looking at the problems that we have here, including things like racism. I deny to myself and to others that there is an element of racism in the US society, which it is. And I'm not a lefty. I consider myself a moderate. I'm against defunding police as a policy. But when police behaves in nasty ways, it needs to be retrained, brought within the parameters.
There need to be controls.
Controls, and also there are police practices all over the world that sometimes in the US, we're just being way too harsh. What I'm trying to say is that being an immigrant, being from a communist society, I was really not paying attention to real challenges that were brewing here. And now these issues are bursting out in the open. And I need to wrap my brain around what I'm looking at. And as I said before, and you said, the extremes meet at some point. The extremes are not viable. We need to look for, again, excuses the cliche, we need to search for common ground. And yes, Republicans and Democrats need to work together. Unfortunately, even after the defeat of a very unsuccessful, in many ways disgusting president, I do not see the commitment from the Democrat side now to work with the Republicans. And the challenge of how you find the center in today's America probably is a huge, huge challenge, maybe as difficult as the defeat of communism used to be.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. Tune in on Thursday for part 2 of my conversation with Ariel. We will be talking about Russia and why you want to keep an eye on US-Russian relations, even though Soviet Union is no longer and the Cold War is technically over. Some fascinating stuff there. Shoot us a message, let you know what you think about the show. And don't forget to share the show with your friend. Maybe you know someone who escaped a totalitarian regime like Soviet Union or Cuba or some other scary place. Or maybe you know someone who's interested in international politics or journalism or human rights. Just shoot them a link and let them know you're thinking about them and help the show grow. And remember, we're here to stay. We'll find our way. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Please keep staying safe. Love you all. Peace.
My country, you can keep the rest. This is my country, my damn country, and it don't mean